One thing the so-called founding fathers, the people who wrote the Constitution, warned us of was perpetual wars. James Madison was adamant that if a country that conducted perpetual warfare and had a military empire, their freedoms would be lost and they would collapse. George Washington said very similar things. Remember, he was a general. Unfortunately, many of our presidents have not heeded the advice of the framers of the Constitution. Barack Obama is one, who now has won the Nobel Peace Prize. It's absolutely amazing and ironic that Obama has won the Peace Prize, but he now heads up the largest war-making empire unsurpassed in history. In the process, the American taxpayers are going to continue to be bled dry by what we call the military-industrial complex. It's a military empire now that stretches around the world, that conducts perpetual warfare around the world. In fact, military troops now are stationed in 177 countries, or 70% of the world's population. And believe it or not, maybe, because the government figures are very, very difficult to calculate because they hide figures well, our government, in a very corrupt way. About 50% probably of all spending by the federal government is spent on war. And Obama's defense budget for the coming year is probably going to be over $1 trillion, the largest ever. Then there are the human costs of war. With the amount of troops that Obama has now committed, some 30,000 more, which brings it to 100,000, and Obama actually has committed over half of that 100,000 as president to Afghanistan, are going to be all the brain injuries and all the other casualties that we see, and the stress, the post-traumatic stress disorder among a lot of troops, thousands upon thousands, and that's by Department of Defense estimates. History shows us, though, that military empires do not last. They all collapse. You look at Rome, you go down the list. They never, because countries cannot finance military empires. They're very, very expensive, as we saw with the financial collapse that happened under George Bush. A lot of that was due to the war-making machine that Bush himself put together. Dwight Eisenhower, who was the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe during World War II, in 1961, in his farewell address, finally came to the conclusion that something bad had happened in America. He said that there was this, what he called the military-industrial complex, had gained power in high places in government, and was now dictating what wars we fight, and it become a money-making business, which he said would lead to moral collapse and also the loss of civil liberties. Essentially, Eisenhower, the former general, became a peacemaker and advocate of peace, and he saw the deadly consequences. In this same address in 1961, this is what he had to say. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. This is not a way of life at all, in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron. From time immemorial, all the great spiritual and religious leaders have spoken out against war, from Jesus to Gandhi to Martin Luther King. In fact, Martin Luther King was stridently anti-war. In his famous speech he gave at Riverside Church in April of 1967, King recognized that it was time to stop war. And this is what King had to say. This business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, or injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of people normally humane, of sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. What King saw was we were leading to a country that would be filled with hate. And look around America today as it splinters, as it seems to be breaking down, as people on every side are barking, yelling, and screaming at one another. We can't have civil discussions anymore. King saw all this coming, and he knew that if we didn't break away from the war machine and get control of it, and we haven't in the high levels of government, and something we expected President Obama to do, then we were going to end in a death cycle. And this is what he had to say. Wisdom born of experience should tell us that war is obsolete. We must either learn to live together as brothers, or we're going to perish together as fools. Which way will you have it? Should we work together? Should we reduce the war machine? Should we get under control? Or should we perish together as fools?